Okay, so going to the next slide. So obviously COVID has been really interesting, obviously a terrible thing, but interesting in that it's really impacted different countries in a massively different way. Does anyone know, maybe you can see, what country has the highest debt rate per million before looking? So it was the United States, it was actually the UK as of last week. So UK obviously has not handled it very, very well, which is quite surprising given its reputation as having quite a good health service. Why has it handled it well? There's lots of different reasons. Yeah, there's been a massive variation, okay? If you look at Singapore, for example, I think the debt rate, maybe you could check, the debt rate is something like 5 or 6, no, per million or something like that. Per 100,000 of population. So you're seeing this huge variation of factors of 10 or 100, okay? So I think, once again, I have to say, but COVID is interesting, particularly from an economics perspective. The amount of data it's created, the amount of studies that are going to come out of COVID, and how different countries responded, how it impacted different economies in a different way, is literally like an economist's dream. Okay? For the next 10 years, and probably myself, unfortunately, sometimes maybe the research we're going to be doing is all about how COVID impacted economies. Okay? I actually had a very similar speech I made about more or less exactly this time last year, where macroeconomics had actually been relatively boring for quite a long time because there was a trend of just more and more liberal trade, basically more globalization, more trade. Then our good friend Donald Trump came along and imposed a trade war, first trade war between the two largest economies in the world, okay, and obviously Mexico and Canada, big countries as well, had a massive impact, okay. Bad from an economics perspective, but very interesting to study and see how it impacts different economies. We will talk about that at a later time, okay. Obviously, a trade war between China and USA is nothing compared to how COVID's impacted the world economy, okay. As we've seen, some countries being hit a lot harder than others. Those on low incomes, okay, have suffered significantly more. There's some statistic that I think in Africa, the average additional government spending due to COVID on health has been $1 per person. So basically nothing. So obviously some countries have really suffered a lot more than others. Interesting from a political side, okay, the groups that have suffered the most in the Western countries have been people on low incomes, as Trump and Brexit. Everyone's aware of Brexit? Everyone knows roughly. We will talk about Brexit at some point. Okay. The data has been showing this group, low-income groups, working class, mainly males, but females as well, already pretty angry. That's why you're seeing things like Trump and Brexit. That's the main argument. Okay, COVID has not done anything to help them due to the inequality, both income and health, that is created between these two different groups. Okay, so how that's going to be shown in elections over the next year or two or longer is going to be very interesting. Okay, so undoubtedly the impacts of COVID have already been the initial impacts have been quite huge, obviously, but I think most economists would say the long-term impacts, much like 2008, you saw the first-term impacts, but really, in terms of political impacts, was a few more years before we started to see that. We're probably going to see something quite similar with COVID. That's what most people see. Okay, unless there's a massive recovery. How optimistic would this classroom be on 2021? From an economics perspective, do you think things will get better economically? Okay, so not much. Yeah, okay. So I think there is quite a lot of anger out there, and who knows where that's going to get directed. I think we talked about GameStop. Okay, I think a really interesting thing is an interesting fact is so who's this guy here? Elon. What's his wife called?
The God of Goddess.
I know the girl.
The what?
The God of Goddess.
The God of Goddess. Is that his Reddit? Okay, I like keep that coming. They're quite funny. The God of Goddess. Very good. Very good. So basically, this map shows all the countries in the world that Elon Musk has a higher income than. Okay, as you can see, Venezuela is there, yes. Venezuela, all of Central America except for Mexico, most of the Caribbean, Paraguay, Bolivia, Uruguay, all of Africa. I need to move this thing this way. And quite a lot of East Asian and Western European countries. Okay, so they're all the countries that he made more money than last year. I think it was, did it say the number? I didn't actually say the number, but it's over half the countries in the world. Okay, something we talked about inequality, but then there's some very interesting economic things going on that's really started in 2008, but have really been accelerated due to COVID. One of them is the massive disparities between the very richest and some of the poorest in the world. That's already been creating a lot of anger. In fact, that's probably the most talked about thing in economics is how you deal with the inequality and the anger that it's causing and how it's polarizing politics. Okay. So yeah, that's some other things we are going to touch on. So I hope after the lecture we had last week on Friday, which now feels like 2 years ago, and also what we're going to see today, we can all agree that what we will be studying in this class is definitely going to be interesting. Without that, it's important. Now, I will try and keep this as economics as possible. We're not going to hopefully wander into politics too much. At the same time, as I said before, when you're studying macroeconomic fundamentals, and I need to change this face mask, don't I? Studying macroeconomics, there's always going to be this link between what's happening in the economy and what's happening in politics. And as I said before, what's maybe the most important thing of studying economics is really helps you understand, okay, what's been going on, okay, in the world around you. Okay, that's the main thing I hope from your first year macro course you're going to take away. Every time you open a newspaper in the future, and you read an article, I guess no one reads newspapers anymore, but maybe a Reddit post, okay, you'll maybe have a better understanding than you would have if you hadn't done this course. That's my main goal to get a takeaway from this. Okay, so I haven't actually properly introduced myself, so I will just quickly say this. Some students say this is quite a nice thing, just I give a bit of a talk about myself. Obviously, Irish people are not really renowned for boasting. That's more of our English neighbours. But just a little about myself, just in case you ever a lot of students do email me about things not related to economics after they see this. So quite briefly, I worked as an economist for this guy. Does anyone know where this door is?
Number 10.
Number 10. A lot of students don't get it actually. Yeah, number 10 Downing Street. Okay, so I worked there in the Prime Minister's office during my university, which is really fascinating actually. A lot of stuff going on in the economy at the time. That was kind of leading up to Brexit. Brexit hadn't happened yet. That was really, really good. Does anyone want to guess what football stadium that is there? That was probably the best football match I've ever been to in my life. That was the two teams based in Medellin. The classical. Independence Day?
Independent.
So we were actually an independence fans, but yeah. I've never seen, I'm sure that you've maybe seen football matches like this in South America, maybe in Spain, but it was just constant noise for 100 minutes, basically, just non-stop jumping. And I don't know if you can quite see, you can't really see from here, but a lot of people just stand on the edges and lean over, hanging onto one of these massive, I don't know, banners or something like that. So yeah, not the most health and safety place I've ever seen in my life, but really, really fun. That was great. So I was in Medellin, so yeah, let me just work there, Prime Minister's office, then worked as an economist in the Department for Education in the UK. Then when I did my master's, because working for the government is very interesting, but you don't get any money. So then I worked as a management consultant in London as well for 1.5 years. So I worked in the government sector, worked in the private sector. That was very interesting, obviously a lot more stressful probably than working in the government, but pays a lot better, but that's just how it is. Post-Brexit, as I said, I'll tell you why post-Brexit maybe another time, but basically there wasn't much consulting post-Brexit for a while, so I went off to Melbourne. I worked at the university there, Medellin, Colombia, as we've talked about a few times, and now 2 years working in Madrid. The reason I actually put this up more than anything is a lot of students do have some intention to study in the UK. A lot of my students say they want to do a master's or at least a year or something like that in the UK. If you're interested about that or anything you've seen on that slide, feel free to message me about that. Always open for economics questions, but if any questions about where should I study, where London or anything like that, very happy to talk about that. Or obviously careers, or I don't know, where's the best bar in Medellin is also a fine question. Okay, so that was good. I was in Sierra Leone in the university as well. That's the best university in Sierra Leone. It was an interesting one. Okay, so time for some important stuff. Okay, how you get assessed in this module. So people, please make sure you understand this, because I've had too many students in the last few weeks on video calls saying they didn't understand they had to get above a 5 in this or that. Okay, so a few things actually. This has actually changed compared to last year. So just be careful if maybe you're talking to students here above or anything, the assessment has changed a little bit. The main way that's changed, that's actually I think quite important for you. And let's go through it one by one. Okay. So first you have an applied knowledge test, which is going to be a 1.5% weight, so 15% of your final grade. That's just a midterm, okay? That's just another name for midterm. It's just called the applied knowledge test. So we're going to have, I've actually decided the date for that. After this class, I will send out when all the evaluations are. Or you should probably be able to see that. Has that come out yet? Because for all your classes, okay. Well, that's going to come out pretty soon. So that's going to be, I can't remember exactly when it is. I don't want to give you the wrong date, but it's going to be sometime in March, relatively soon. Okay. The first, let me get this right now. Then we have this individual work. So this is where it's changed, and I think people do need to be quite, keep an eye on this. Individual works just can be an independent project you do yourself. The weight is 1.5 points, and this is the important thing. Students need to score 0.75, so 50%, okay, in order to pass the subject, okay? So that is, I'm worried about that, because I know that comes up quite early. I know a lot of students haven't really got their heads in the right place, maybe. The weather's got good, they do a really bad individual project. In the past, that wouldn't have mattered. Now you need to get 0.75, okay? So that is one I'm worried about, because I think potentially, like if I looked at, I think I actually did, I did this. I looked at the grades of a lot of individual works from last year, and a lot of them wouldn't have got 50%, okay? But that's, I don't make the rules, obviously, that's decided by all the people who teach this. Okay, but that is one just to be aware of. Then you have a group work, which will be at the very end. That's 10%, the final grade. Then you have the applied exercises and case studies. So that's just going to be homeworks that I set. I'll probably set the first homework that is actually economics on Friday. Yeah, probably be Friday, I'll set that. So that'll be that. So that's just, I think I'm going to set like 6 or 7 homeworks throughout the semester usually. So each one of them will be a percentage of that 10%. And then obviously most importantly of all, you have the final exam, okay, which is 50%. Once again, this has changed a little bit. The multiple choice section used to be worth 30%, it's now worth 20%. And the reasoning questions and problems is now worth 80. Once again, from what, that is going to increase, I would say, the amount of people who fail. Usually students, and this is where I make a comment that might be regarded as slightly sexist, but I don't think it is. Boys tend to do really okay, even if they haven't done any work in the multiple choice. Okay? I've seen this so many times, and I've even got the data to prove it. The average grade of a boy in a multiple choice class is quite okay, and then they fall down loads because they haven't actually done any revision. They're kind of good at guessing. I think for some reason boys are a bit better at this, or just, I don't know. Most girls actually do the work. They do quite okay in the multiple choice questions, and they do really well in the reasoning. They tend to be a bit better at writing. Okay, so they're always fine. So there's a lot of boys out there who pass by the skin of their teeth. Does everyone know that saying? Skin of their teeth. Just because they just get a high enough grade in the multiple choice, and then absolutely F up the second part. Okay, do really, really badly. But because they have this grade in the multiple choice, they still pass. Girls, in fact, I think 80% of people who fail are usually boys. Okay. Now that the multiple choice is worth less, I'm a little bit worried that once again the people who just got by the seat of their pants, that's another saying in English, okay, might not be getting by. Okay, so I'm a little bit worried about that. So if you're a boy who's planning to not do much revision, maybe take that into account. Obviously, there's some girls who fall into that as well, but just from what I've seen, and it's been the same in Academy, it's been the same in the other universities I work for. There's always a few guys who just seem to manage to get 5.1. It's quite impressive.
Called the SAT guessing tree.
Probably what's that?
It's called the SAT guessing tree.
SAT. But I've never done an SAT. Isn't that just more? That's all multiple choices. Yeah. Yeah. So.
That's what it is, a guessing tree for.
Saying that, we will spend some time doing a revision. Oh, okay. We'll do some revision lecture where I will show you like you can gain multiple choice questions. I think a lot of people do badly on multiple choice questions because they haven't learned how to kind of work out. If you don't definitely know how you can work out which ones it's not. Anyway, it's going to be a lecture we're going to do later on, which is basically how to do better on exams. Okay. Some students say that's the most valuable lecture we do. Okay. One thing I would say is, have you guys noticed how many lectures we don't have because of Santa and just holidays? I think we missed 4 or 5 classes. So it's quite a lot. So we do have to go a bit faster than usual. Okay? Because we just finished this class last year and we didn't have any missed days. So we're going to have to make up some time somewhere. I'm not sure where. So yeah, to do those kind of extra classes like the revision lecture, like the exam review lecture, which are both very useful for the final exam. We do need to make up time somehow. I haven't worked that one out. But anyway, please, this is the one, if you want to take a photo of this slide, like obviously it's there, but please have this fresh in your memory going forward. Okay? Okay. So that's how things have changed. Let's keep going. Well, yeah, take a photo of that, but I have it summarized as well. Hello.
No, it's not. I zoomed in.
Yeah. I know there's a lot of photos of me lecturing. The Caddy students sent them to me. Okay, there is quite a few, but it was good for, I was able to change my LinkedIn, so it was quite useful. Okay, so what do you need to get in the final exam? Let's just see if people picked up what was on the slide. What do you need to get in the individual work to pass? 0.75. I personally think it's a bit weird saying like that, but yeah, 0.75 or 5. I'm going to grade it out of 10. So you need to get a 5 out of 10 or 50%. What you need to get on the exam? More than 5, very good. And there's one other thing that you need to get to pass this module.
75%.
Very good. Yeah, 75% exam. I think there's actually one more thing. Oh, and of course, then a grade of 5 overall. Okay? So if you get above a 5 on the individual work at the exam and you come 75, but you do awful on the homework, this never happens, but just in case, you will still fail. Okay? So that's all that there, all summarized. That's extraordinary. We'll talk about that if you need to do it extraordinary. I'm not going to waste everyone's time talking about that. Okay, so that's the first 2 bits of administration. Okay, so then we have this. Okay, so these are the topics we'll be studying. Can anyone guess why some are green, some are yellow, and some are red? Easy, medium, high. Very good. Okay. Now some people don't. Some people don't always agree with this. Some people would say maybe economic growth could be a bit yellow and labour is actually a bit green. But most students do kind of agree. The first few topics are relatively easy, I would say. Most students don't get too confused, basically because the concepts aren't too abstract. Everyone kind of knows what GDP is. Everyone has a rough idea of what economic growth is. Then we move on to the labour market and price level. Okay, so everyone kind of knows what labour is, but studying it from an economics perspective is something you will have never seen before, I see. Okay, and the models you see that underline that. Okay, so that is when suddenly students start looking a lot more confused in class. What is the price level? What's another name for that? You said it earlier. When you said it earlier, it's going to get confusing. You said it. Yeah, you said it. Sorry, later. You must hate that. You must hate that. My cousins are twins and they have a very similar response. Yeah, there's a weird percentage of twins in my family actually. So they do get that a lot. Price level, another word for inflation. Once again, you've probably heard of inflation. Measuring it, understanding it for the first time is quite tricky. Once again, that's usually when I start to see a bit more confused faces in the class. Okay, and then I'll be honest, it jumps a lot. And that should be red, but that should be maybe glowing red. The difference between the first 5 topics and 6 and 7 is quite big. Explaining the money market, now, once again, it's recorded, so I wish, but my own honest opinion is I wouldn't teach that overly in first semester, or first time you do macro. I'd simplify it a lot and save it a second. In fact, that's what Academy do, and that's what most universities do. For some reason, you will see this money market, and you're going to see it again when you do more macro in the future. Okay? The money market, I'd say, is probably the hardest one, actually. 6 is probably a bit harder than 7. Understanding, it's probably the hardest thing to explain as well. So explaining that's always very difficult for me and students. Just watch out for topic 6. That is a particularly hard one. And once again, it's just because it's so abstract, okay? Like how many of, let me think of an example. How many of you...
Do you bank?
Yeah, we do that, yeah. So like how many of you have taken a loan from a bank? Yeah, so once again, if you haven't done that, that's just the beginning. But I think that's okay. It's more the models are quite tricky. But yeah, there will be a lot of reserve ratio requirements and all that stuff. Okay, increasing the money supply. At the same time, it's probably in some ways the most important because all the economic stuff that's going on in the world right now really relates to this, the money and the financial system. So we've already talked about quantitative easing. Okay, but all this other stuff that the governments have been doing to respond to COVID would fall into this category. So really understanding this, particularly obviously if you want to work in finance, is so key. Okay. So yeah, we do 6 is the one we're usually going fine, and then we get to 6 and things slow down a bit, but this is how it is. But you guys are all economics students, so it should be fine, right? No problems. Okay, so we'll get to that nice and quickly. And then topic 7 is, it's not as bad, but once again, it's a bit it's a bit more interesting, but it is a bit tricky as well. Okay, so just to warn you, so the next few weeks, I think the midterm will probably test everything up to the labour market. I'm not sure yet, but probably. And then the rest will be more tested on the final exam. So yeah, just be aware of that. So it starts off kind of easy, but it does get quite hard. The money in the trade will be definitely harder than anything you've seen in micro. Just a warning, I guess. Okay. What do we have next? Okay. So as we've talked about before, we broadly divide up macro. The last lecture, we're mainly talking about why some countries are poor, rich, the difference between them. Today, and for the rest of this module, we're really going to focus much more on why do economies have business cycles, how do you measure the economy, how do you manage the economy, I think is the best way of describing it. Okay, so that's what we're really going to be focusing on now going forward. Just be aware. Just to be clear, I just put this in because I forgot about it. So if I send out to, I think I have I sent out the Google Drive link to Teresa? Yeah? No. Teresa's not here? No, she's not. Okay, I'm going to send that out after the class. I just, so you'll be able to see all the slides. So I'm going to keep it on Google Drive for now, but everything's already up there. Okay, well, not everything. You've got the lectures here, and this is why I put it in. As I said before, we're not going to be talking about this too much. If you are interested in what we've seen so far and would like to learn a bit more, okay, I created in here, I've put a lot of listenings, podcasts, basically articles, things like that, that are a little bit more focused on that other side, the economic growth, poor, rich side, okay? So that's already on the drive, which you'll have access to. Maybe when we have the break, I'll send it to Teresa so she can send it around. Okay, so that's the documentaries, YouTube stuff. It's really good, actually. Students have appreciated that a lot before. Once again, in terms of maybe your exam, it could be useful if you throw in an example that you've read in an Economist article or something like that. Okay, so that's already there along with the first lecture, and I'll keep putting the lectures up on that Google Drive as we move forward. Like I said, I think I should be using a OneDrive, but most students prefer Google as well. Okay, just be clear though, this is, managing the economy. Okay, so all this stuff and understanding it all, okay, is the core things you really need to understand to be able to, what makes up an economy. Okay, so you have to understand what underlies an economy, where it comes from, all these different things, and then how to manage it. Okay, so that's really what we're going to be talking about a lot in this module. And that's not to say it's not interesting. Okay, like I said, I'm a bit more interested in the other one. Managing the economy is still very, very important. Okay, as it says there, decisions made by a handful of economists have huge ramifications for the rest of the world. Okay, the decisions, we'll talk about COVID in a second, but really the decisions made in 2008 by 1 or 2 economists have probably had a bigger impact on the world, definitely, than any of the politicians, any Trumps, any Obamas, okay, anything like that. All the decisions made by Obama's team, basically, I think it was the 3rd week of his presidency when he had to start doing this QE stuff. The economic impacts and how it's affected everything in the world, we're going to talk about how, has been absolutely massive. Okay, so that's more in the past. Here is, okay, this economist. He is the chief economist of the European Central Bank. Does anyone know who's the boss of the European Central Bank? Any ideas? French? You've moved seats. French. She's French. She was the French finance minister in the past. Did you say que?
In the past?
Yeah. She was before. She has a pretty good CV. She was like French finance minister, head of the IMF, and now head of the ECB. Yeah. Christine or Catherine? Yeah, okay. So I was saying it wrong. Okay. Christine Lagarde, okay, is now the head of the ECB. She actually has a law degree, not an economics degree. Okay, so a lot of the decisions, you know, she's a very good, what would you agree? She's a good speaker, maybe? She's, the really economic core decisions, the really important, like the plumbing almost, you would say, that's coming from this guy, who is Philip Lane, who's an economist from Ireland. Okay, he used to be the head of the Irish Central Bank. As you can see, the decisions he's making can have immediate negative or positive impacts on huge numbers of people, as I said before. You know, it really is this guy, okay? The decisions in Europe, you know, I'm sure everyone's seen clips of stock market rooms, everyone going crazy, shouting at each other. The most that tends to happen in terms of when you see a lot of people getting very, very excited is when decisions are made by someone like this, the head of the European Central Bank or the head of the Fed. Okay, so can someone tell me what decision would he make that maybe has a huge impact? What's one thing he controls or the team that works for the European Central Bank control? Yes. Money supply, yeah, it's definitely so. Someone say the rate of interest as well? Yeah, so those two things. The rate of interest and the money supply, very similar, but at the same time different. Really though, when it comes to, when you see people running around, it's if they decide to change the rate of interest, okay? That is a huge decision that has huge impacts on the whole European and the world economy. Why does the rate of interest have such a big impact on everything? There's going to be some core stuff we're going to go through.
The cost of borrowing.
Yeah, exactly. That is the cost of borrowing. Also, price of money, sometimes known as called as well. And what happens if the cost of borrowing changes? What would you expect to see? So say the interest rates go down.
More people, they don't.
Yep, very good. And we're spending maybe. So you tend to see this boost in the economy. So this is a really big, important topic we are going to go through. First of all, does anyone know what kind of policy this would be called? Very good. Monetary policy. Okay. Expansionary monetary, very good. Okay, so that's expansionary monetary policy. When that happens, what you tend to see is the economy doing well. So these people get very excited. Why would these people maybe, like, okay, say they work in this stock trading room. Why would they get excited if there was an expansionary monetary policy? What would you might expect to see? So this is a hard one. Let's work. Remember how financial markets are very linked to it. What's that?
More cash flow.
Exactly what happens if there's more cash flow for a company in the future. What's going to happen to
More profit.
yeah,
Higher share price.
higher share price, exactly. So they're all linked together. Okay, so unlike GameStop where the share price went up for interesting reasons, okay, when you see decisions made by these, okay, by this man, that's going to have a massive impact on financial markets. So price of companies, share prices, stuff like that. That's just one of the many ways, and there's literally hundreds of ways a change in the interest rate impacts everything in the economy. But the one that usually gets the most excitement, okay, because at the end of the day, you can make a lot of money very quickly. It's just like GameStop. Why did it become such a big story? Was because a lot of people made a lot of money, a lot of people lost a lot of money. It's very much the same here, okay? In fact, what I really should be doing is, instead of teaching you guys, I should be working for an economic consultancy, advising companies and financial investors on which way I think this decision is going to be made. Okay, that's how, if you're an economist, you can make lots and lots and lots of money working for a private consultancy, basically trying to advise on how you think the economy is going to go. Okay, what decision is this guy going to make? How's that going to impact? Okay, should you buy or sell this? That's where the serious money is in economics. Okay, it can be a little bit boring, I guess, at times, but I have a few friends. I have a good friend in Singapore who does something a little bit like this. Okay, it's a pretty good job. Okay, okay, but he makes some pretty big. That's kind of complicated and a little bit dated now, but basically, most people would argue that the European Central Bank and actually all the major central banks have actually handled COVID quite well. Why? That's a hard question. Can anyone maybe answer why would they be viewed as doing quite a good job? I'd be surprised if anyone knew that. It's quite tricky, but they were seen as being very quick to respond, and creating, basically stopping confidence going out of the markets. As opposed to 2008, where there was quite a slow response to the financial crisis. In the crisis post-COVID, they basically said, we'll do everything we can take to ensure the economy stays on course. Okay? Which really links, I guess, to the next slide, I think. Okay? Oh, gone too far. Now, we'll come back to that in a bit. Okay? So yeah, this is, basically they did a quite job because they haven't really had a repeat of this. Okay, so this is a country's economic statistics from 2007 to 2018. As you can see, so I'm going to get some of the guesses countries, so try and think what it could be. 2007, the GDP was pretty high actually, about 3 or 4%. Government budget balance, so was the government spending more or taxing more? It was spending less than it taxed. It was positive as well. That's the blue line here, just broadly positive. Okay, go over here. The unemployment rate on average was less than 10%. Okay, then we get to 2008, and what happened? An absolute economic catastrophe. Suddenly, GDP went from +4 to -4 within a year. Okay, a massive recession. Okay, government budget balance suddenly went from being positive to being very negative. Okay, unemployment rate went from being not brilliant, but quite low, 8%, to being somewhere like 28%. It was actually 26, I think, at peak, which was, I'll give you a clue, it's not America, because 26% was as high as America had in the Great Depression in 1929. And youth employment, 55, close to 60%. Does anyone want to guess what country that was? Spain. It was Spain, yeah. Okay, that was a Spanish economy. So yeah, complete economic catastrophe. Much of the world economy. Spain suffered maybe more than almost any country. Greece probably would be worse, but some countries, definitely. Probably the most scary thing is this unemployment never really came down. Okay, unemployment in Spain, and that is, I've said that before, I think. No. Probably, the economic macro statistic that really makes Spain stand out. There's some positive ones, like amount of GDP from tourism. But what makes it stand out even compared to Italy or Portugal is the stubbornly high unemployment that the country has. Okay, and that has never really recovered. Okay, so basically, what I'm trying to say is that managing the economy post-2008 was seen as done quite a bad job. Okay, basically, the kind of general summary of why it was a bad job is people weren't creative enough. Okay, people didn't do enough to the central bank and the governments didn't do enough to stop this happening, kind of fend this off, to try and stimulate the economy. Okay, manage the economy in order to stop such a bad recession that obviously lasted for quite a long time. Okay, in a lot of countries. Okay, some countries are seen once again, a bit like COVID, we're seen as doing a much better job. China, for example. Some countries are seen as doing a lot worse. Okay, so yeah, peak of 26%, so very, very high. So once again, it's probably too early to say what are some positives of COVID, but people might argue that because of 2008, we learned a lot about how to properly manage the economy. So when COVID hit, we had a much better, as I said, we threw out the rule book, we got a new rule book. Okay, so far it's been kind of argued that we have managed, from an economics perspective, managed it quite well. Okay, still obviously a long way from perfect, but that's that. I think we talked about this one already, if I'm not mistaken. But just to be clear, for Spain, okay, so we talked about this? We saw this picture, right? So where was this? Does anyone know what this building is? Sorry?
I think we didn't see this.
We didn't see that. Okay, maybe see, this is the thing when you have two classes right beside each other that you're doing the same thing, you can get mixed up. So it's good. If I'm acting like I've shown you before, please do tell me, because sometimes you can get mixed up. Okay, I need to put this mask on. Could someone tell me what is the building on the left? Sorry? I'm gonna have to talk a little bit louder, but I think you said the right thing. Nope. It looks a bit like it, but it's not. And this is quite important. Okay? This is a really big thing. If you study economics, you have to know this, basically.
Where is it?
It's about 20 minutes from here, on a bike. Which, by the way, if I'm ever late, it's because I get those electric bikes, and sometimes... Does anyone ever use those electric bikes?
No.
Yeah. are pretty hit and miss, to say the least. Sometimes they work, sometimes they do not work. So the building on the left is what I call the Finance Ministry of Spain, the Ministry de Hacienda, which is located somewhere, I can't remember where it is exactly in the center. Let me just move it, I guess. Yeah. Okay. Ministry de Hacienda. And where is the building on the left? That building is not in Spain, and this is a very important thing, okay? Yeah, very good. What's it? Okay. As Jorge said, and it's quite important, is the building on the right is the European Central Bank, which is located in very good, yeah, Frankfurt. If you want to get that one. Frankfurt in Germany. Okay? Not Brussels, not Berlin, not Paris. The European Central Bank is located in Frankfurt. There's some strong historical reasons why it's there, which I won't go into. Okay? The very important thing is, okay, someone said the Spanish bank, what's it? The Spanish Central Bank. Okay, now if we were doing this lecture exactly 20 years ago, it would be a slightly different answer. Okay, what decisions would be made? Let's start with the left one. What decisions will be made in Frankfurt, in the European Central Bank? We've already answered that, I guess. What kind of policies are made there? Monetary policies, very, very good. If monetary policies are made there, what policies are made in the Ministry de Hacienda? Fiscal. Now you guys need to get it. Does everyone else? We're going to go to fiscal quite a bit. I just want to make sure everyone gets that. Okay. So fiscal, very broadly, policies is your tax and spend. As a government, how much you tax and how much you spend. As we saw with the case of Spain, okay, that's why I have the photo. Oh, using the wrong one. We saw the case of Spain up until about 2008. Okay, Spain was okay. If the government budget balance was positive, was Spain taxing more than it spent, or spending more than it taxed? Very good. So we have your taxes here, your spending here. We have a budget balance surplus. Taxes are here, spending's here. Okay, you're spending less than you earn in taxes. What happened as of 2008 was this massive reversal. Okay, taxes went down massively. Government spending, well, let's say it stayed the same. Does anyone know why taxes went down so much in 2008 in Spain?
Because of unemployment.
Very good. Because of unemployment. That's basically the main one. Because there was so much unemployment. Okay, that means you have to spend more to unemployment benefits, but also you get less tax because you don't get tax on people's incomes. That was a big change. Okay, that's why you saw that change in unemployment. Okay, so that's where the fiscal policies are made. I can close this. Fiscal policies are made. Monetary policies were made in Frankfurt at the European Central Bank. So why is that interesting? Why did I say 20 years ago that would be a different situation?
Because 20 years ago, Spain during the monetary.
Yeah, the euro became a thing 20 years ago. So that's the monetary union already existed, but people used different currencies. Yeah, and then the European Central Bank was created to have a harmonized monetary policy for the whole of the EU. One of the biggest economic decisions made in the world in the last 50 years. Okay, so a single currency and a single monetary policy for all the countries within the EU. Okay, so what countries, does anyone know, what countries in the EU were in the EU but didn't go for the monetary policy? Sweden's one. What was one that was and was no longer? The UK, Brexit, okay. So that's one of the interesting things about Brexit. It was all about take back control. But as opposed to most countries, they have their own monetary policy. In the Bank of England, which I've been in, very strange place. Has anyone seen Hogwarts? It's not Hogwarts. I do know Harry Potter. What's the bank called in Harry Potter? Gringotts. Gringotts, okay. It literally looks like Gringotts. Like there's people walking around with top hats and pink blazers. It's like going into the wizarding world. It's very strange but interesting place. Yeah, so England has its own monetary policy. All the other countries, so Ireland, Portugal, Spain, France, Germany, has a monetary policy that is made by a team of Europeans based in Frankfurt. That's a big change compared to how it was before. Please know that one of the most basic things, and something you really do have to understand in your first year macro, is this big difference between monetary and fiscal policy. Two tools that governments, both at a national and a regional, so European level, use to influence, to manage the economy. Okay, the two most important tools by far. What's that? Okay. So we're going to be talking about it a lot. We're going to be showing how you respond to one and the other. They really are very important. But understanding the difference, we're going to go over a lot. We're really understanding basically that fiscal policy, tax and spend, monetary policy, broadly is interest rates. Okay? We're going to go over a lot of times how that influences the economy, but at the moment, I just want people to understand that fiscal policy is this one, okay, and monetary policy is this one. Where they're made, the decisions, okay, and how they, what they do exactly. Okay, I think that's a really important point. So I think we'll finish there for a little break. I know it's a little bit early, but no, it's okay. It's okay. I'll have a little break as long as you want. So I've skipped a few slides here just for the sake of time. I might come back to them later. But this is a term that you might have heard in the last few months, which is called helicopter money. Okay. Can someone tell me, first of all, maybe an easy one. So can someone maybe describe what helicopter money is? Or what's, this is actually quite a hard question, I guess. But where it comes from the term, like what is it about, why is there this term being thrown around that is helicopter money? So I think you can maybe see that ECB has been doing what we call helicopter money. So what is exactly that? The ECB's response to COVID? Does anyone know? What was the European Central Bank's response to the COVID crisis? Okay. So remember, if the Treasury or if the financial department of a country does fiscal policy, the ECB does what policy? Monetary policy. Okay? So the response to COVID from the ECB has obviously been a monetary policy. Okay? The reason it's called helicopter money, okay, that's a kind of slang term for it. A more official term would be, does anyone know what type of monetary policy? I think one of you guys said it. Expansionary, very good. Expansionary monetary policy. Expansionary monetary policy, that we're going to see a lot, is basically this thing called a bond buying program. Okay? It's called the PEP, or the Emergency Purchase Program. Okay? This is where things get a little bit, there's a lot of terminology, a lot of acronyms, a lot of confusing things. Really, at the basic level, what you need to understand, what the ECB has been doing over the last few months, has been in a massive expansionary monetary policy, which really boils down to getting money, real money, into the economy. Okay? That's why it's called helicopter money, because some people jokingly, but some people actually seriously have actually suggested just literally getting helicopters, flying them over, and dropping money. Okay? They don't do it like that. They do it in a different way, through a different channel. But to some extent, it's not too different to flying over and just dropping loads of money on a place. Okay? So get money into circulation. Okay. So what's the rationale? Why would you pump lots of money like this into the economy after something like COVID? Exactly. People spend it. And that helps you, what would that do to your economy? Yeah. So, yeah. Obviously, boosted, right? It's going to, we saw that thing of Spain's GDP going up massively. You would hope an expansionary monetary policy would push that back a lot. Okay? So that's really what they've been doing. Okay? We're going to see later on when we talk about the money, and like I said before, the money chapter is one of the most complicated ones. Understanding this process is not the most straightforward thing. But really, at a basic level, and at this moment in time, all you really need to understand expansionary monetary policy is basically getting money into the economy, okay, in order to stimulate the economy. So what would contractionary monetary policy be? Expansionary is putting money in. What would contractionary? Yeah, deficit. Just taking money out. Okay. Once again, how you do that, it's a bit interesting, but we'll see. Okay. As you can see here, that's one way that's been the response. Okay, there's also been a fiscal response. So could someone tell me, if you were the head of the Spanish government and you wanted to respond in a fiscal way to COVID, what would you do? Positive. So once again, we use the terms expansionary and contractionary. Okay, an expansionary fiscal policy. What would that possibly involve? It's actually
Increased government spending and lower taxes.
exactly. Okay, one of the two: increase government spending or lower taxes, and that's exactly what they've done as well at a European, but also at a national level. Okay, so fiscal, and this is a bit confusing, I guess. Fiscal policies tend to be made at a country level, but the European Union also has a budget, a fiscal budget, and it decides how that is spent. So what you've seen from a fiscal response, hundreds of billions in medical costs, spending on the cost of COVID, the medical costs, unemployment support, okay, giving money to people who are unemployed, so that's 100 billion there. And July, an additional 750 billion was approved, okay. So seeing huge amounts of numbers, okay, that add up. So in terms of monetary response, we're seeing 1.35 trillion, and a fiscal response 1.29 trillion. So just numbers that you can barely even imagine. So many zeros. Okay. Once again, has it been effective? It's hard to say. One thing you can definitely say, it's been very quick. Compared to 2008, where decisions like this took a very long time, these decisions were made very quickly. Why is that? 2008 taught us that the speed of your reaction is almost as important as the reaction yourself. You can react quickly, stop panic getting into financial markets and just businesses in general. That can do a lot to stop something bad turning into a really bad crisis.
I mean, yeah, but in terms of fiscal policy, no matter how quickly you respond, there's still going to be a certain timeline, because that's essentially one of the problems of fiscal policy.
That is, yeah. I think that's not my next slide. You haven't been reading ahead now, but we will talk about how that is. And that is just one reason why, okay, monetary policy tends to be the weapon of choice, you might say, for a government or a European level to respond to crisis. It's immediate. But just take it for the fiscal one. In 2008, and not so much there, but if you wanted to respond quickly from a fiscal perspective, what would you do? Increase government spending or reduce taxes? So that's not actually right, but I can kind of see why you might say it. But in fact, actually, it's far quicker to decrease taxes than it is to increase government spending. As you can see, you see this with Trump a lot. Anything that needs to be agreed in terms of money has to get through, and this is not just America, but a lot of countries, has to be agreed upon. It takes quite a long time. Okay, then you agree how much money you're going to have to spend. Okay, where does it go? That's when it all gets very political. This is let's use the example of Spain. Is that money spent on updating the roads of Madrid, or does that go to somewhere in Asturias, or do you build a new motorway in Andalusia? That political, and that is a political decision, often takes a very long time. There's a lot of arguing. Okay, you see that even when in Europe, where the money goes, it takes a very long time. That's why responding to a crisis from a tax response, once again, it's a fiscal response, but a tax can be almost immediate. If you just basically say income taxes are down by 5%, or more likely VAT, does everyone know what I mean when I say VAT? Taxes. Not? So the tax, the tax on clothes, or in most goods you buy will have some sort of VAT on it, almost every good, actually. You could put that in on a Monday, and that would come into effect on a Tuesday. Okay? And suddenly, if things are a lot cheaper, you're going to see more spending. So not so much with this, but in fact, the vast majority of the fiscal response to 2008 financial crisis was actually taxes. Okay, massive reduction in income, and not so much income, but VAT taxes, wealth taxes, taxes on housing was massively reduced because it was a lot quicker, and it was just it hits your whole economy theoretically. This is a big mistake they kind of made actually. Theoretically, in a very equal way. Everyone pays a lower tax. Okay, there's no politics there. Probably the biggest mistake they made, and this is, I guess, why they've done it differently, is reducing taxes. If it was just reduced blanket for across the economy, what impact might that have that could argue is negative? If taxes are just reduced, that's good, potentially, but can you see how it could have another problem?
Less government revenue.
Of course, less government revenue. That is obviously, so you have to get the money from somewhere. Think about the big term we talked about a lot in the last lecture. We talked about it particularly in respect to Latin America, but other places as well. Unemployment related to it, but
More borrowing.
well, what's that?
Like the government just has to borrow more.
Yeah, that well.
Because it-
Yeah, you do have to borrow more, but and that's true. So I don't want to get into that government borrowing right now. Basically, government spending tends to get spent on things that usually impact poor people a little more in society. Things like new roads, unemployment benefits, just schemes to help people who've lost their job. They tend to be people on the lower level of the income spectrum. Reduction in taxes tends to benefit people on the higher level. Okay? So what you saw is this massive focus on just doing taxes and less on the fiscal spending side. Was effective, particularly in the United States, actually, was quite effective. However, it had a big impact on inequality. Okay? So inequality was already quite high. The response to 2008 was two different ways, but what we're going to talk about, the fiscal response did have a big impact on inequality, which, you know, as we've talked before, can have its own impacts on your recovery. Okay? So the kind of, well, I won't go into that right now, but some people say that the tax reductions were so strong on the very kind of top income brackets, but what you tend to see is when a very rich person's income increases due to reduction in tax, they only spend a little bit more of that income. What you tend to find is you increase incomes of poor people in society, and it kind of, you know, it would make sense. If you're quite well off, you already have everything you need, you're suddenly a bit richer. Now, this is not everyone. You don't tend to spend that much more. If you're kind of on a poor level of income, there's still a lot of stuff you probably want. If you get a bit richer, you buy that stuff, and that actually has a bigger boost on the economy. Okay, so that's gone into a little bit of detail, but I think it is important to know from a historical perspective, okay, how the response to 2008 was maybe seen as not as good as it could be. Okay, so we'll talk about that a bit more. But yeah, so this has been the response to the crisis of the COVID crisis. So, you know, spending on medical costs, guarantees to companies, basically money if you look like you're about to go bankrupt, okay, to kind of keep those companies going. And kind of the same thing, if you've lost your job, money to the unemployed. That has been the main response. Was it enough? Like I said already, we don't know yet. Just to put it into perspective, in 2008 in the US, it was an 800 billion stimulus package, and it took basically a year, if not longer, to get it agreed, and then a lot of things got changed. The COVID by President Trump was worth 2 trillion, and it was signed after about a month. Okay, so a massive difference in the response to COVID compared to the 2008 financial crisis in terms of size and also speed. Okay. Okay. But the interesting thing is, you know, these huge decisions, well, aren't, you know, people doing this are, you'd hope, quite smart, the economists. The theories that they're based on are very fundamental, basic theories that we're going to be seeing in this course. Okay, obviously, they have very complicated mathematical models with lots of data, but really the basic theory of stimulating the economy is what we're going to learn in this course. Okay, so the really fundamentals of macroeconomics is what these $2 trillion decisions that literally impact everyone in the world are being made on. So I guess one more reason why it's quite interesting to know what we're talking about. I don't know why this slide's in there. I think I got mixed up. With just me in Ireland. It's a bit weird. So who's been to Ireland again? Where did you go again? Wicklow, yeah, Wicklow, yeah. And who was the other person? You went to Ireland?
Yes, for a year.
Oh yeah, who's talking that time? Okay, the very back. Okay. You went for a year to
Manchester.
Oh, okay, that's nice. What was it like down there? For a year?
Yeah.
Did it help your English a lot?
Yeah.
Isn't there? Yeah, in Cork there's this place that all the Spanish students go drinking. It's outside. When they're like 50 minutes, is it a Tesco or one of these supermarkets? They all sit outside there. Yeah, it's one of those supermarkets. I've seen it myself. And were you in the same place?
No, I'm
Athlone? Oh, in the middle. Oh, okay, perfect. That's a very. How did you end up in Athlone? There's a school there, or? Really? Did you have a good time? For a year or so? Just 3 months.
no, 3 years.
3 years. Oh wow. Wow, 3 years in Athlone. Poor guy. I guess COVID's not too bad for you then. If you're used to living in Athlone. I'm sorry, and you as well? That you went to Temple Bar? Very good. It's a good pub. When you were 16, probably at the time, were you? 18? Oh, just last year. Oh, very good. It's expensive. How much is a pint of Guinness today? That's €7, I think. It's quite expensive. But yeah, we'll talk about Ireland. I think we're going to talk about Ireland today, actually. Yeah, we're going to talk about Ireland. But it's a good place. Anyone been to the... Did any of you guys go here to the Giant's Causeway? No? You didn't go? Too far. Okay, so we're going to talk about Ireland. I know, actually, in my other class, students already, we will talk about Ireland a bit and its economic experience. Actually, very interesting. Okay, so back to this. The kind of joke in Ireland is that on the 1st of July, all the Spanish students riot and suddenly the place gets 90% louder. It's kind of true, right? Have you ever been in the dark to Wicklow?
No.
The train? You never rode the train back to Wicklow? Okay. Sometimes, yeah, I remember July 1st comes and suddenly it gets a lot louder. And they think no one can speak Spanish at all. It's quite funny. Because you hear some pretty funny stories at times. A lot of underage drinking going on. Okay. So we've already done micro. Let's just quickly, you've probably got this by now, but macro is a really important word, and you're going to see this word quite a bit, is an aggregated version of micro. And this is something I personally think a lot of textbooks, a lot of even websites, a lot of people who teach economics, they gloss over the fact that really what we're doing in macros is aggregating everything we've learned in micro. I really do think there is a tendency in economics to specialize very heavily in either micro or macro. I'm quite lucky in the research and the work I do. I don't do that as much. Very important to remember when we're studying economies at the Spanish, the European, the South American, and even at the world level, this is an aggregated version of all the decisions that are being made by people and firms. So there's other actors like the government as well, but it's really important to understand that decisions made at this level is what impacts your macro level. And, it's quite simple. It's not that surprising. You have thousands, hundreds of thousands of firms, millions of people. What they do on an economic level is what determines the success or failure of your macroeconomy. So please always do keep that in mind. The stuff you've learned in micro is heavily related to what we're going to be studying macro. It's going to be different, but it's, the word underpinning is very key. What you've learned in micro underpins everything you learn in macro. That's why you always learn micro first and macro after. So yeah, that's what I'll come back to that slide a few times. It's quite an important slide, actually. Okay. So as I said, macroeconomics is this particular macro arc we're going to be studying is basically managing the economy. A famous quote is, "It's like physics, except if all the atoms have brains, and as such we're as unpredictable." Okay? I lived with a lot of physicists during my master's. And they kind of joke, the models you use in physics tend to be quite good because atoms and I'm not very good at science, but all the things, atoms and stuff, they behave kind of as expected. Often when you make these macroeconomic policies, okay, you are going to be dealing with humans and firms. Humans and firms are not rational all the time. Would anyone say they're 100% rational all the time? Okay, I think already today we've probably seen some irrational behavior. Like, for example, drinking too much on a weekend and being a bit hungover on a Monday. No students like that, I don't think, today. Usually, okay, there is a few. Okay, is that a rational decision when you're sat there in class and you think your head's going to explode? Probably not. Okay, so you do see these decisions made on a regular basis. Okay, that's why, and it's not a bad thing necessarily, but managing the economy is incredibly difficult. Okay. A really good article I read when I was about your age, just starting off this macro journey, was this one here. The economy, if it was like a car. And basically, I won't give you the full analogy. If you want to read it yourself, do. Okay. But basically, it's like driving a car. Okay. You want to overtake this truck. Okay. So you put your foot down on the accelerator, but nothing happens. Okay. You're like, oh, the car's not working. You just stay the same. Then, okay, you try and turn left, but as you turn left, so is the truck, okay? Then the accelerator kicks in. You're about to go into the back of the truck. You try to press your brake, but by the time the brake kicks in, you're already on the side of the road in a massive car crash. Okay? That's one of the best ways to understand the economy. It's not like driving a car. It's like driving a car where there's literally very slow responses. Okay? You try and do one thing. You want to put your foot down to try and overtake the truck. By the time that kicks in, the truck's moved into your lane, and next thing you know, you're into the back of the truck. Okay? That's kind of an analogy for sometimes you want to stimulate your economy. Okay? You want to put your foot down, but then something else happens. You actually need to destimulate your economy. But by the time that kicks in, you basically cause your economy to basically boom. Okay? We always talk about recessions, but booms can cause as much of a problem as a recession. Does anyone know how? Usually we say Venezuela's a bit like this. Inflation, yeah. The impact that has on your currency and stuff. Booms can be just as dangerous as recessions. Okay? And often, obviously, booms are followed by quite bad recessions. Okay? So please do read that article. It's kind of, it's a good one to read. How the economy is like driving a car that's really, really bad. In fact, we're going to use analogies of cars quite a lot in the next few lectures. How many people in this class drive? A few people, yeah. Once again, not that much, but I think people can relate to a car. Okay. What's that?
I drive.
Yeah, it's interesting how high percentage of the Latins drive. Slow response. Yes. Put that accelerator down. Okay. So yeah, we will talk about that. But just probably the biggest criticism of economics is sometimes we think we're physicists. Sometimes we think we can make these models that can perfectly predict how people and firms and things will work. But at the end of the day, people are not like atoms. That's one of the biggest things to take away. And one positive thing, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, that view of, no, we can perfectly predict how to manage the economy became very mainstream, and very precise models on how to basically alter the economy became the norm. And there's kind of been a pushback in the last 20 or so years from other economists saying some of these models that basically assume a person is completely rational, has perfect information, knows exactly what they're going to do on a day-to-day basis, is very good at saving and predicting what it's going to consume. Having those assumptions within your model causes the model to just not work. Okay, so we'll talk about that. Anyway, time to talk about a few economists. Speaking of more. Okay, does anyone know the guy on the right or the left? Okay, so who's the guy on the red? The Time article. That's Keynes, very good. Okay, so these are two documentaries. In the past, I might make people watch this. Yeah, I think I might do this actually. So you'll see you are proper economists. Okay, so what I'm going to go. This is a little homework. Okay, it's basically there's two documentaries. I think these links will still work. Let me know if they don't. To YouTube documentaries. One on John Maynard Keynes and one on Hayek. Okay. So what makes this really interesting, and once again, why it's quite different to physics, you could say economics, is that, or any sciences, most scientists, let's keep it with physics, most physicists agree on maybe the very basic things being correct. I think 99.9, let's say all physicists will basically agree that the Earth revolves around the sun. When it comes to economics, these two people being perfect examples, the most core fundamental basics, you have people on one side, Keynes' side, okay, who completely disagree with the other side, with the Hayek side. And we're talking about we're going to see what they are exactly. But basically, does anyone maybe can summarize? You're going to watch, maybe if you can't, go away and watch one of these and come back. Usually what I do is I get people to go into groups of two, and then one person watches the Keynes, one person watches the Hayek, and then they briefly talk about it in the next class. But just to get an idea of why I want you to study this, does anyone know what would these two economists disagree on? The very core. Yeah, that state impression, was it? Yeah. So to very highly summarize these two views is, once again, complete polar opposite views. Keynes believed heavily in intervening in the economy. Okay, that when things go bad, such as a recession or the financial crisis, the only way you're going to get out of that recession quickly, I guess, was to intervene through government spending and monetary policy, but particularly government spending. Okay? Then you have on the right-hand side what we call the neoclassical school, okay, which was literally the complete opposite. Okay, this is quite a high-level summary. Some people might not completely agree, but basically the belief that the government should never ever get involved in the market ever. If you leave the market to its own devices, your economy will be a lot much more successful than any government involvement. In fact, any government involvement will just lead to a worse problem down the line. Okay, so what I said is, remember, I had that slide, two way of dividing up macroeconomics. Why are some countries poor, so rich? We're not going to talk about that. But what was the other one? What's this kind of? How would I describe this area of macro? Yeah, that's it. I think that's one. But I think also, we were going to talk about Venezuela, but maybe not. But this, see up there, managing the economy. Okay, so what this macro is all about is managing the economy. What makes it interesting and difficult, and particularly difficult to teach, because you have to teach two completely different interpretations, is that some economists would be on the Keynes side and believe very highly in government intervention, okay, to such an extent that you start to get into socialist policies and tendencies. Okay, so very active government involvement in the economy. And some economists on the other side would believe we probably shouldn't almost be studying this. Just leave it to the market and everything will be fine. So can you just see how big a divide there is? And that's why things can often get quite fraught, let's say, within economics. Okay, when you have two economists in a room, they completely disagree on literally the most fundamental thing. It can often make any intellectual debate quite challenging. Okay? So that's another really important takeaway. And there's another article at the end, and it's sometimes when it's a Monday morning and I look a bit struggling to explain some of this stuff, this article kind of goes through why macroeconomics is one of the hardest things to teach. Because as opposed to physics, where you can all agree that the Earth goes around the sun, when you teach macroeconomics, you have to kind of, this is what they think, this is what they think, somewhere in between. Okay, that does make it quite a challenging subject. So you can have some more sympathy for me. Okay, put this in, we talked this, poorest country in the world, arguably the DRC, 1,000 a year. Richest country would be Luxembourg, okay, over 103, so factor of 100 times. I'm not sure if I'm going to, just to point out, we talked about Ireland there, very interesting economy, some might argue, possibly besides the exception of, no, probably, some might argue the most successful economy, besides maybe China, of the last 40 years has been Ireland. I think it's really important to just get that into a historical perspective. This is The Economist. Has everyone heard of the magazine The Economist? Okay, we're going to be using The Economist quite heavily in this. I'm going to talk about that in a bit in this class. In the 1980s, okay, The Economist cover was famously the poorest of the rich. Okay, Ireland was, besides, probably without doubt, the poorest country within Europe. Okay, it was seen as an economic relative failure. Okay, it had joined the European Union, but not too long before it joined the European Union, but was seen as just doing awful, seen as quite backward. There was obviously a lot of political violence going on in the north of Ireland. Okay, fast forward to 1997, just 17 years later, you saw a complete reversal. Well, not quite actually, but you're seeing the first signs of real optimism. Ireland's economy really started to take off in the early 90s. Okay, and then by 2008, the famous saying, the luck of the Irish. Okay, Ireland has gone from being the poorest country in Europe to being, by some measures, the richest country in a very, very short period of time. Obviously then hit very hard in 2008 by the financial crisis, but recovered relatively quickly and is now doing very, very well. Students often ask me, how come Ireland's done so well? Does anyone have any opinions on that? Does anyone know kind of general reasons people? It's to do with fiscal policy a bit.
Companies want to raise money.
So the biggest economic event of the last 40 years has been globalization. Ireland has definitely benefited very heavily from this, possibly a lot more than most countries.
She had an issue with Apple.
Yeah, we're going to do the Apple tax thing. So basically, a huge amount of American companies are located in Ireland, starting around the 80s, okay, and make massive amounts of profits. So Apple's the most profitable company in the world. Microsoft, Google, all of them are there. So it's pretty crazy. But at the same time, not doing taxes. But they employ lots of people, pay lots of tax, who get a lot of money and stuff like that. So that's one major reason why Ireland's done very well. Joining the European Union has helped it massively as well. Once again, it's kind of related. Now, if you want to, if you're an American company that wants to have a base in Europe, it pretty much makes sense to go to either Ireland or the UK. Why is that? English speaking. It's also very similar shared cultures. Obviously now, because of Brexit, Brexit has not been so good on the Irish economy right away. The long-term benefits of literally being the only country in Europe that speaks English potentially be massive. So another country I'm in all honesty, quite bullish about would be Ireland, as opposed to being the UK. I'd be very bearish about that country's economy. A lot of negative signs coming out of the UK. But it is, important to understand that good management of an economy, some of it you might argue was luck. It was kind of, I guess, luck to some extent, globalization, we spoke English. At the same time, having very low rates of tax on corporates was one of the biggest ways we attracted all these, which is obviously controversial to say the least. But other very strong policies of education, okay, spending on getting an educated workforce has paid off 100 times over for the Irish economy. Probably something that isn't focused on too much, but has come back into attention has everyone seen Joe Biden claiming he's Irish? You've seen the videos on that? Okay. It doesn't hurt when something like half of your country back in the 1850s emigrated to America. You tend to have a lot of connections within politics. So that was definitely a factor. So completely related. Most of it was on America, but the success story of Ireland was, I think, as I said before, a bit like China. No one was expecting in the 1980s for a country to take off like that. We will talk about Ireland a bit more. It's not all good news, but we can learn a lot from that. Okay. I want to move on to the main tools for macroeconomic analysis. So this is how the main way you measure an economy to see if it's doing well or not. We'll do this. So everyone's aware of GDP, unemployment. We already talked about inflation. The one students almost always get the most confused with is government deficits and government debt. Could someone explain the difference between a government deficit and a government debt? Any ideas? You have to think about it a bit like a tap and a bathtub. Okay? So it's a bit like this. So every year, if you run a deficit, that's water coming out of your tap. Okay? Turn on the tap. Let's say you're spending more than you're taxing. Okay, remember, you're spending here and you're taxing here. Okay, if you're spending this much and only taxing this much, there's going to be this difference. So that's a deficit. Okay, if you keep running deficits again and again and again, what is that going to do? It's going to add to your government debt. Okay? So say in year 1 you had 0 government debt and you had a deficit of 10 billion. Okay, next year your government debt will already be on 10 billion. If you run another government deficit of, let's say, 5 billion this time, your government debt will increase to 15 billion. Because the words are similar, students often get these confused, and they're a little bit similar. Please make sure you understand the difference between a government deficit and a government debt. So government deficit, the difference between tax and spending. If you tax less than you spend, you're going to have a deficit. Okay. Government debt, if the government spends more than it collects in taxes, you're going to see increased debt again and again and again. Okay. We already talked about that yet. So if you keep building up your debt too high, that's when you start to see. Most countries do have some debt. The Eurozone crisis of 2014-15 was really triggered by some countries. Does anyone know the acronym that was given to these countries?
Yes.
Yeah. You know your stuff? Yeah, the pigs. So who was the pigs?
Portugal, Greece, Spain,
Yeah.
and the I is
The I was actually Ireland. but then we got out of trouble a bit quicker. So then I became it. Once again, quite an offensive term, one I wouldn't use personally. Have your country called a pig. But basically, a lot of that, the pigs were countries that had pretty big deficits and debts increasing. Okay, and that's when the European Union had to step in and try and do stuff. And basically, yeah, that's another economic story for another day. But please do make sure you understand the difference between those two. Then you have these other measures. Okay, this is quite interesting actually. So you have international trade. So really, I'm going to make this clear right now. Like, we're not going to focus too much on trade. Really, how macroeconomics modules tend to work is you do this thing called the closed economy, where you just look at what happens in the domestic economy, and then when you do more advanced macro, you start to talk more about trade with the rest of the world. Okay? They're the main ones. There's lots of other measures of how well the economy is doing, like besides having low unemployment, low inflation, high GDP growth. Another really interesting one, this is one here. It's called the happiness index. Okay, very simple. You just go around to lots of different countries and ask people how happy you are in that country. What I think makes it more interesting, you have to be careful a bit. Like happiness can mean different things in different countries. I think the Latins in the room would probably appreciate the slight difference between that. But I think it is quite interesting because while it's not the most scientific in the world, you can see that there are some countries that have very high. So here's the happiness. I put this as Argentina is the 29th happiest country in the world. Okay. Now I went away and I got the country's GDPs ranked in the world, GDP per capita. What you can see is there's quite a lot of discrepancies between the two sides. Some countries have very, very high measures of happiness, but do very, very badly on the GDP rank. Okay, Guatemala, I believe, is the biggest difference. On the flip side of that, you obviously have countries that score very highly on GDP per capita. Singapore, third richest country in the world. In terms of happiness, 34. So massive difference. Anyone think why Singapore might not have the highest happiness? Qatar, yeah, Qatar is obviously okay. So yeah, that's good. Let's do Qatar first. Why might Qatar be the richest country in the world but not have particularly high levels of happiness? Okay. Yeah, poverty is definitely. Does anyone know how the Qatar economy operates? People know about this a bit more because of the World Cup. Okay. So you have a massive population of people not from Qatar who will work there quite badly on the football stadium. So you basically made from the Southeast Asian subcontinent, so basically from India, a lot of them are Bangladesh, will work in that place, not get very much money, okay, and not really have much rights. That doesn't tend to lead to much happiness, okay? So still the richest country in the world, but massive difference. Why, okay, Qatar is one, but maybe why Saudi Arabia? Why would Saudi Arabia have a very high GDP, but not particularly high level of happiness? What makes their country interesting?
I do think it's the poverty level.
Probably a bit less in Saudi, actually. But think what's in Saudi, how's there inequality in Saudi between two groups? Gender, yeah. What you tend to find in Saudi Arabia is, depending on the sex you're born, you have a very different quality of life. Okay? Maybe some of the Latin plans for this. Why do you think Latin countries tend to score very highly on happiness, but not so highly on, well, happiness but not economics? Why is there a difference?
Weather.
Latin blood. It's a good answer. Yeah. Any others?
The weather.
The weather is definitely a big factor. 100%. Okay. I think it's worth also pointing out Spain's one of the few countries in the world that are very similar in GDP and happiness. Okay. So 36. Okay. So, I'm going to finish with that because I just wanted to put in that we have all these economic measures, and we have all these models and stuff, particularly GDP, which we're going to be studying now for the next 2 weeks or so. It is important to remember that GDP and how rich a country is not a perfect measure for how successful a country is. There's plenty of countries that have very high GDPs, but in terms of how the living standards, I guess, or the quality of life a lot of people have aren't actually that high. Okay, so there is that difference. Trying to get a balance is quite good. Okay. Does anyone know what countries would score very highly on both of those? And it's funny because you said the weather. Does anyone know what country's the happiest in the world?
Sweden?
It's not Sweden. It's close
That's
enough.
not Rica,
No, it's not Costa
no?
Rica.
It's one of those. The happiest.
Yeah, it's so the interesting one is the Nordic countries tend to score very highly on both of them. In fact, the country that has the highest also I think has the least days of sun in the world. Maybe I think it's Finland. So basically, yeah, so close to our top six. Finland is number one happiest country in the world. We're going to watch a documentary about that a bit later on. Has a very high GDP. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is there's definitely a correlation between how happy you are and your GDP, but there's plenty of examples where it doesn't really have too much of a connection. Okay, so we'll finish on that. Do go and watch those documentaries, which are on the slide. So we'll talk about them on Friday. So they're quite long. What I would say is watch, if you enjoy them, watch the whole thing. But watch the first 20 minutes or so just to get a rough idea of how these two different economists, okay, saw the world. We'll talk more about that on the class on Friday when we talk about economic policy, okay, and how it's changed over time. Okay? So we'll finish there, guys. Thanks very much. I'll see you on Friday. Have a good week.
There was a question about happiness in the A-level.
Really?
Like you first think it's not going to come up, then it actually came up.
Really? That is interesting.
That's where people fail. Like that on that edge.
You did the A-level. Same here. My I think a micro A-level really bad. The macro one was fine.
Yeah, you can get macros easier, but I would feel like that's
Yeah, I'm about it. Yeah.
micro, I think it's hard.
A-level. Yeah. Guys, just one more thing. I will be taking a register in the future. I didn't take it today, but just so you know, I will start taking the register as of Friday. So do make sure you come because there's 75% attendance.